Hey everyone, Shashank this side. I hope everybody is doing well and safe at home. As you can see on my screen, topic for today is AWS Elastic Disaster Recovery. It's an interesting topic that we want to learn about, we want to explore, but before doing a deep dive in understanding the flow, let's understand why or what's the need of this service to use for. So I'll take an example where an events like ransomware or human error can cause multiple application failures. So what we need in that case, we need an elastic or a faster reliable method to recover those environment, whether it is for on-premises workload or cloud-based model, right? So generally in a traditional DR system, what we do, we invest our time into hardware system designing, we start replicating stuff, the environments basically, which takes a lot of time, duplicate ideal resources, in turn requires a lot of cost, a lot of investment, right? And that's where AWS Disaster Recovery Service comes into picture, where it helps us to recover the system from a reliable point in time recovery in an efficient and fast, effective manner with few simple clicks of configuration. So that's our agenda for today. We will going to deep dive into the configuration and more into the concept of disaster recovery, because as you know, like with any production system, we always want a DR system, right? Because we don't know when the system will be going to create some issues on the application, right? So in that case, we need some sort of disaster recovery plan where we can promise to our customer with minimal downtime, less data loss, with the fast and reliable recovery, whether it is an on-premises system or a cloud-based application, with cost-effective manner in terms of storage, compute, and obviously the point-in-time recovery. So in general, what AWS DRS, the disaster recovery service, is doing in the backend, it creates we have to create a replication agent. That replication agent work as a media between the source server and the DR environment and try to replicate whatever the time interval we decide. And in the backend, it takes the snapshot of the source server at certain duration. And during the failover time, we can use the minimum point in time recovery. The latest snapshot can be taken for recovering our instances, the source environment, if there is any disaster happen, right? So you can do it from region to region, you can do it within the region, or you can do it for the on-premises system too as well. Now that's a basic architectural flow what AWS has provided, where elastic disaster recovery, you can quickly, reliably recover your on-premises system or a cloud-based system. Then you have to set up, basically you have to define a backend replica for the data replication, which act as a continuous environment. Then launch a system, you can take out a drill, initiate a drill, whether it is working fine or not, or you can directly go for the recovery. Then minimum operation is required. We don't have to worry about maintaining and doing an operation over this particular environment, because AWS is doing the maintenance in the backend. And finally, we can do a failover, like a launch another instance within few minutes with the latest point in time snapshot. So that's where the whole architectural flow of AWS DRS works. And now it's time for the demo that I'll be going to show you in my AWS account. So let's jump to our AWS account. This is my AWS account. I have an instance running as a source server, which is hosted with an Apache. As you can see, this is running with a test page. Now, in order to create or play around with the disaster recovery service, we have to go to services. Then it's part of the storage, AWS Elastic Disaster Recovery. Click on this. And here we have to do certain step to configure the replication first, because in order to create a disaster system, what is the requirement? You need a source system, right? Then only you can create a disaster recovery for that particular source system. And if anything happened to the source system, we can immediately restore with the disaster recovery service. So for that, how it works, click on how it works. So you have to set up a service where you have to create an IAM permission and everything, then install a replication agent on the source server. Then it will start replicating to AWS, and finally you can perform a drill or recover and fail back. So we have two options. You can perform a frequent drill by launching drill and recovery instances. And the other one, you can directly go with the recover and fail back system. Use this console to quickly recover to AWS. After recovery, you can use this console to fail back to your original source server at any given point of time. Now, in order to do those steps, what we have to do, we have to first configure the source server over here, which means we have to install an agent. In order to do that, click on Learn More. This will navigate to the installation page, which is basically we are using Linux. So let's click on Linux installation. So that's basically a step to install an agent on your source server. So agent installer follows this particular format. So you have to do wget, then this is a Python script that will initiate the install and download of this particular agent hosted at this environment. So what we have to do before doing that, there is one step that is very important, that will to create an required permission for an IAM role. I already have an IAM role created, so just need to attach that role to our instance. But let me show you that particular role. Elastic Disaster Recovery, this one. So I have created this role AWS Elastic DR, and the permission that I have given is Elastic Disaster Recovery instance policy. So if you don't assign this particular policy to your instance, it will not able to communicate with this particular service. Because in AWS world, if you want to interact with one service from another, that's the permission section comes into picture, which is your IAM. So let's go to EC2 instance again, the dashboard, and we will be going to assign this particular role to our running instance. Click on this, then we have security, modify IAM role. Let's see, AWS Elastic DR, this one. AWS Elastic DR, save it. So that's another interview question, how you can replace, or is it possible to modify the IAM role for a running instance? Yes, it is. Just now we have done that. Now the role has been assigned. In order to install, now what we have to do, since we are operating from Virginia, in this particular section, if you see, we just have to give the region as well, right? So let's copy this. Let me open my terminal. I'm already connected to an instance. Okay, got disconnected. Let me connect it again. Perfect. Sudo to it and run. Now we have this Python script over here. What is next? Let's see. Now we have to run this particular script. Obviously I don't remember the steps, so I'm just following the documentation. Since I'm already a sudo user, so that's why I'm just directly running the command. Here you have to give the region and everything. US East 1, basically configuring your AWS profile. Now we need to provide access key and secret key. So let me go to IAM users. Come on, close. I'll use my user, and I don't have the secret key, I believe, so I'm going to create a new one. Let me do deactivate, and we'll delete this one. Let me delete the previous key, and we'll create a new one. Copy, go to terminal, paste. That's my access key, and that's my secret key. Enter. Perfect. Now this particular section is asking to replicate some of the disk. Type the path of the disk or separate it with a comma. So if you have a multiple disk associated with your system, then you can type it with the help of comma. To replicate all the disks, just press enter. So I have only one disk, but in near future as well, if I do for the production system, I will try to replicate all disks with my source server. Okay, now all volumes replication successfully identified, downloading the AWS agent on the source server. Now it will try to install the agent on the source server. This takes nearby a minute of time. And once the source server installation is done for the agent, replication agent, let's go back to disaster recovery. Here we'll be able to see our source server listed. So I'm going to have this video pause for a minute, and once the source server is in this section, I will resume the video back. Okay, as you can see, the agent installation is done. That's why I'm seeing the source server over here as 10.20.45, which is the internal IP address of my instance. Let me show you that, 10.20.45. I will also show you the result over here. So this is finished. The following source server ID, we are getting the ID and everything over here, and it is installed successfully. Now, before again going into the deep dive of this particular configuration of the source server, as you can see, it's in the initial sync phase and data replication is already started. I have 8 gigs of data storage over here, so it will not take much time for the replication. So let me go through the settings first, because when you go into the disaster recovery part, you have to do certain settings, and based on that particular setting, a new instance, which is called a replication agent instance, will get triggered or initiated in your instance section. So let me go to the instance section and refresh it. Let me clear the filter. As you can see, Elastic DRS replication server. It's a T3 small. How T3 is small? So that's a configuration which is coming from the settings section. Let's go to settings. Let's click on edit. Here you can select number of things. Which subnet you want to provision your instance. Replication server instance type, T3 small, micro, depend upon the choice that you want to go with. I prefer to go with the smallest size because it's just a replication agent and doesn't require to be a big number, high-end servers on this particular environment, because we don't want to pay a lot of cost to the replication agent, right? I have chosen GP3, which is a faster SSD, 20% cheaper than GP2, a general purpose environment for the storage. eBase encryption is default, so I'm using a default KMS, you can say, from the server side. Security group, I have chosen my custom security group. You can do data throttling as well. Use the private IP address for the data replication over VPN, direct connect, or peering, depend upon your choice, or create a public IP. So I am using public IP because I don't want create an environment just like a production as for this particular video, because this video is just to clear the concept and how you can do the configuration, because I don't have a jump host and a private network where I can do a lot of configuration, because I have to pay for this particular demo as well, right? Now, point in time recovery, snapshot retention, I have chosen as 1, minimum is 1, maximum is 365 days. This is the snapshot that it takes. That's what, from where it tried to recover your instances, right? In terms of the disaster situation. You can bring out the tags as well. So once you done with this, save the changes, and based on that, it will create the replication agent instance, which is this one. As you can see, since I have a public IP created, that's why it's showing the public IP address. So that's the settings part. Let's go to the source server again. It's still in the initial phase. Let's go inside this particular environment. Let me close it. What all things you are getting over here: recovery dashboard, server information, tags, disk settings, replication settings, and the launch setting. What all are these, right? Since we haven't done any recovery part, that's why there is no job ID, no job status, right? Here is the data replication status. Replication is in progress. What all things has been done: it created the security group, replication server is launched, booted the replication server, authenticated the service, downloaded, staging area has been created, and finally it's doing a data transfer. As I said, it's 8 gig, hardly take much time, but initially it takes, So for example, if you have 100 gigs or 1 terabyte of disk, obviously it takes a lot of time initially for doing a replication. So these are the status that you can get in the dashboard section. Also, you can track the event in the CloudTrail. As you can see, 1.32 out of 8 has already been done. It's showing as 10 minutes left. And also depend upon what size of instance you are using. T3 small doesn't have much memory and CPU to process the request right away. Let's go to the server information. You will get a generic information over here, all the status update, the server AWS ID, and this is the ARN, unique name. That's the identification, hence basically the host name of your private IP address of your server basically that you are getting. That's the instance ID, the source server instance ID. What kind of hardware you are using, CPU, then you have a disk, the address and RAM, and this is Amazon Linux. It's giving you that information as well. Also, AWS is recommending based upon the RAM and CPU, go for C5 large. Again, sometime the recommendation is correct, sometimes recommendation don't follow the recommendation what AWS is providing. Go with the load what you have, right? Tagging, I am just having a tag of name, then storage, which is basically an standard HDD. Replicated storage is almost 2.67 gig. Replication setting, which I showed in the settings section, that's the same settings, or the configuration is set it over here like GP3 and everything. And finally, we have a launch setting. This is where the recovery agent will help us to initiate your EC2 instance while doing a drill. Now, if you want to copy the existing private IP address to a new instance, you can do that. You have to click as yes over here. So there are like few settings that you can do. By default, they are using this template, which is having certain number of configuration. You can go for the basic settings, or you can choose none, where it will allow you to edit everything by your end. Start an instance upon launch, yes. Copy the private IP address. If you say yes, then the new instance will spin up, will have the same IP address. So I prefer no over here because private IP address can change, but the front-end interface will remain same. Again, depend upon application to application requirement. If you want to transfer the server tag, yes, you can do. OS licensing, since I have selected as basic, that's why it's giving us BYOL, or license included, depend upon what kind of server or OS you are using. So that's one set of launch setting is there. Second one is the template. So basically it's part of an auto scaling concept. So if you want to edit the template, obviously I don't want to go with C5 large or volume is IO1, which is obviously much more costlier as compared to GP2 or GP3. And nothing is in the subnet, public IP, private IP, nothing is there, right? So you can click on edit this launch template, and here you can create your own template. Let's say test default. Okay, source template is 2, which is the default one, which is fine. Here you can launch your AMI. Let's say quick start. I'm going with Amazon Linux. That's fine. You can select whatever you want to go with, Red Hat, CentOS, or Ubuntu, depend upon your requirement. What I'm showing you is you can edit whatever the launch setting is there, right? Manually select the instance. I don't want to go with C5 large. Instead, I just want to go with T3 dot. Let's say the source instance is micro. So we can go with T3 micro as well. I want to include my key pair because I want to log in with the help of key pair as of now. Launch template, if you want to update your subnet, because that's where you want to provision it. So let's go public subnet 1, which is US East 1A. The source server is in US East 1B. You want to select your existing security group. Yes, you can do that. Advanced network configuration, if you want an additional network interface, you can add that to all the interfaces, right? Configuration should be GP3 because that's something cheaper. So I will go with that, and all the resource tagging. What do we have in advanced summary over here? So these are the section that basically where you launch your instances. You can request the spot instance if it is a dev environment or staging environment where you can afford the interruption into the services, then you can go with the spot instances. So everything, whatever we, and the user data, like whatever you want to install during the time of installation. So once everything is done, click on create template version. Template version is created. How this will get used? So click on this one, and in the action, make it as default version. Third is the default, set the default version. Now, based upon this environment, so the ID is what? 44A5, right? Based upon this template, we'll be able to provision a new instance while doing the drill or recovery. But let's go to source server again, because still the sync is happening. Let's see how much data has been synced out. Almost done. So it's good time for us to initiate another job. As you can see, whatever instance we selected or the settings that what we have done earlier, it was showing as C5 large. Now it is showing as T3 micro, GP3, security group, subnets, and everything is there, right? Let's wait for another second or so. It's almost done. So let's go to source. 100% is done, creating a snapshot. Now let's go back to our EC2 instance. We have to, and let's go to snapshots. As you can see, it's creating a snapshot. Base and all these recovery snapshot has been created. This is the last one, which is it's creating, right? Okay. Again, this takes a bit of time. I just wanted to go through all the sections while doing this particular configuration, and so that you guys don't get confused what exactly you have to do while doing a sync, right? So I'm again going to pause this video for a few minutes until unless this is done, and then we finally go with our recovery job or the drill. Okay. So finally our source server is ready for recovery. Now, why we need to do a recovery over here? Like we have two set of scenarios, right? Let's say there is a disaster happened in 1A, US East 1A, or in one particular region. At that point of time, we want to route all the requests to the recovery environment where the data is already replicating from the backend, right? So in that case, my users will not get impacted and the new data will get routed to the new server, which we are considering as a recovery server. So that is something called a failover to a new instance having the previous data, and all the new users or the new data will route to the new particular recovery server. There is another process where once your disaster is done or your disaster is completed, everything is working fine, up and running in that particular availability zone or in that particular region, and you want to fail back to the original server. So in that case, we can do a failback from a recovery server to a source server. There is another process to do that, but let's see as of now what exactly we are going to do, right? So let me go to the recovery dashboard again. Here you can see everything is done, everything is replicated. Now click on source. We have two options: initiate a drill, which is basically into a staging area. You can go ahead and perform multiple drills, or you can directly initiate a recovery. Since data is already there in the replication agent, so we are going to initiate a recovery. My request to you guys, try initiate drill multiple times, see what results you are getting. I'm trying the recovery part. So let's click on initiate recovery. Here it will ask you, hey, which point in time recent snapshot that you want to go with. So obviously this is something I have recently created before this particular video. So I have one at 7:10 p.m. UTC and one is 7 p.m. UTC. So let's go with 7:10. Or there is a possibility like at 7:10 disaster happened, then you want to go back to 7 p.m. UTC recent snapshot. So anything depend upon the requirement and what situation is demanding, you can roll it back to the previous snapshot. I'm going with the 710, which is the latest snap, and click on initiate a recovery. Okay, so last recovery result, it's in pending. Again, it will take time. One of the important factor over here is just to understand for your environment, this service, when you initiate a recovery, obviously this also incur charges. So I'll talk about the pricing model as well. Just give me a few more minutes once this is done so that we can discuss on the pricing too. Again, since you have initiated a recovery job, you can go to the recovery job section. This was the last drill that I did yesterday, and today just now we are doing a recovery. So what it will do, it will go ahead and create a conversion server. So let me go to EC2 instance, refresh. As you can see, it is a conversion server. So this is not the exact recovery server what we have. This is a conversion server, so it will try to convert and create another instance as part of the source server. So that instance, the new instance that it will come up, that is considered as a recovery server, where you can route the request of your new users, or all the data can go to that particular recovery server. So this is kind of an active passive scenario, where active server is down, then you can fail over to the passive server. Once active is up, you can fail back to the passive environment. But again, in that case, you have to install the replication agent on the recovery server as well, because AWS doesn't install agent on the new recovery server. Now this is in the running state. This goes into stop state, then gets terminated and create a new instance, which is a recovery environment. Again, going back to the DRS, click on this DRS. Here is the pricing model. Rate per replication from the source server is $0.028 per hour. So that is something you have to make sure what you are doing in the backend, because management or any business look for pricing. So whichever important application you have, whether it is on premises, whether it is a cloud-based model, just go with that disaster recovery environment. Like the databases for the higher end customer, or for any customers, right? Every customer databases are quite important. So we can go with the replication of the database itself, right? Okay, so that's something, a basic pricing model over here. I'll also share the link, but if you go to the disaster recovery service, there is a pricing model written over here. Now, again, go back to our recovery job history. Since this is doing a recovery, as you can see, conversion started, then finish the snapshot and everything. The latest one is conversion started. Yeah. As you can see, this is the same IP what we have for the existing environment, the source environment. Let me go back to our EC2 instance again. As you can see, this is stopped. Now it will try creating a new server, which is basically our recovery server. So don't get confused. I know recovery, conversion, replication, don't get confused with this. Once you start building this environment, you will be able to understand what exactly all these systems are. Okay, so that's the recovery environment, 10.2.0.45. That's the tag that we have given, but the IP address in the backend is changed. It's 10.2.12.13 and the source one is 10.2.0.45, because we haven't selected the same IP address. That's why we are getting a different private IP address over here. Okay, let's refresh. Start launching the recovery instance. Now you can see the recovery instance over here as well. Once that gets started, it will show you the recovery server here too. Another important factor, as I said, the failback and the failover part, right? Once your server is up and active, I'm talking about the recovery server. Again, don't get confused. Once the new server gets up and active, you can perform a fail over to the new instance, during the disaster time. So recovery job. So once we have server over here, there is an option for failback and failover. Again, I'm going to have this video pause. This is a long video, I do understand that, but the motive behind this particular service is quite important, and most of the organization do find these services very useful because these are related to the disaster recovery plan. Also, as part of the security audit, they look for a DR plan too. How quickly you can recover your instances or environment during the disaster. So let's take another pause and we'll come back again. So finally, our recovery instance is up and running, and I have associated a public IP address, which is an Elastic IP address was available with me. So I associated this IP address to my recovery instance. Obviously, the name tag remains as list 10.2.0.45. You can change this. This is just a tag, but after doing a replication and everything, all the configuration, will it be able to show the test page? Let's see. Copy, open up and paste. Here we go. Whatever data was there with my previous instance, this one 44.192, we have the same setup up and running because the replication is happening in the backend, and we have initiated a recovery as well. So all sorts of data that were present in my previous instance, the source server, now present in my recovery instance. So the new data will always go into this particular new server, the recovery instance. So now the next part is basically when you have done everything, like let's say the source environment is up and running and you want to fail it back. So you can go to the recovery instance section, and as you can see, its initial sync is done. So this is basically what is happening. The data replication is happening in the backend. That is kind of a failover situation is happening. Now, if anybody is coming up and hitting that new server, the data will go, or the new users will get routed to the recovery environment. The next part is basically a failback. Now, failback, again, it will not go right away. You have to install an agent, just like what we did as part of our first initial configuration. We have set up the service, install an agent and replicate, right? Then you have to click on failback. Once you start the failback, it will route everything, like it will start the replication, the data replication and the server replication back to the source server, and then your user will get routed to the source server. So you don't have to worry about the data loss. Data loss is not happening over here. It's as I said, it's a kind of an active passive scenario where there is an issue with an active, we fail over to the passive environment, and the failover is automatic when the recovery is started. The data sync is happening automatically, and when you fail it back, when your source server like active environment is up, then you fail it back to the source environment, and the new users, the new data will go into that particular server. But with this configuration on the source server, the data replication will still go to the recovery instance. That's what this particular AWS Elastic Disaster Recovery service is all about. So I hope this clears a lot in terms of the use cases, in terms of the configuration, what are the steps that we have to follow. I'll share the AWS documentation link as well. You have to take care of the costing factor because that is very important factor that will be going to play around this particular service. It's fairly a new service, but it's prominent, I would say. I have used for one of my client and it's working perfectly fine. They were able to show the security audit section, the SOC audit, what we call that. Yes, we have a disaster recovery plan. But again, depend upon the requirement, depend upon the application. So just play it around within your environment, show it to the management that we can play around with the disaster recovery area. Another section that I'll be sharing with you is like a link for the region to region replication, where you have to initiate the configuration in each region. It is not supported, I believe, in every region. It's, as I said, it's fairly a new service. So Virginia, Ohio, Oregon, Singapore, Sydney, and Tokyo, and the Frankfurt region, right? The European countries. So just play around, Place a comment in the comment section. If you are facing any issue, I'll be there to help you. Have a nice day. Bye bye.